I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, coming up on Football Today.
To say that it was inevitable maybe doesn't do it justice, but certainly Newcastle fans are now reeling with the confirmation that Rafa Benitez will not be extending his contract in a summer of turmoil under Mike Ashley at Newcastle United.
Newcastle United and Mike Ashley. What a fucking shambles.
The only way to get Ashley out is not to go. And if you're listening, you fans, you so-called fans, there were 50,000 scabs there today. It's just like there was a strike and they were crossing the picket line. They're all going and they're all putting money in Ashley's pocket. And he's not going to go until you lot stop going.
But basically, my boycott's now extended to all matches. I don't believe in giving Mike Ashley any support whatsoever. So me being on the terraces, singing and cheering on and things like that, I'm not going to do it.
For many Newcastle fans, it was the final straw. When Rafa Benitez left the club this summer, they did as well. This season, thousands of supporters have decided to boycott their games to protest Mike Ashley's ownership. And in response, the club chose to give away 10,000 free half-season tickets to build goodwill. Yet it has only further alienated some of those boycotting. Today we ask, why are Newcastle fans divided on these free tickets? And what does the ticket giveaway tell us about the power of fans in 2020?
It's not being reminiscent of what we know and what we come to expect from Newcastle United. I think that the vast majority of fans who go to games would agree with that.
Chris Waugh covers Newcastle United for The Athletic.
It's felt flat at times. The actual attendances are significantly down. They've had the least full in terms of percentage of capacity stadium this season in the Premier League. It's been at about 87-88%, and that is at around roughly average about 46,000 for the first 9 games of the season, which compared to last season when the average was well in excess of 50,000, that shows you just how few fans were there compared to last season. And that includes those season ticket holders who maybe weren't there. A lot of the time I would argue that probably the crowd was closer to around 40 to 42,000. And that has led to a sort of tempering of the atmosphere. In a strange way, it's also lessened the effect in terms of there hasn't been as much negativity chanted against maybe the owner or the regime, because a lot of the more vocal supporters haven't been there. But at the same time, there hasn't been as many chants inside St. James's, as there hasn't been the singing, there hasn't been as much of a atmosphere whereby the players have been encouraged by the crowd. It's just felt rather tepid at times, which is very strange.
You said that some of the fans, the most vocal fans, are not coming to the games. You know, obviously you've talked with some of these fans. Are there any stories that kind of stick out or that are emblematic of some of these vocal fans who are still not coming to the games and are still boycotting?
Yeah, I found this season really, really hard to cover in terms of just listening to personal stories of fans who feel they can't go anymore. I did a piece for the very first game of the season, which was the Arsenal at home, which was the first game of this boycott, and I did half of it inside the ground with those fans who hadn't boycotted, and half of it outside in a couple of the pubs around St. James's Park of fans who had boycotted, and it felt like a club divided. There's certain fans who really don't like Mike Ashley and don't like what he's doing, but they say, what I've always done all my life is that I come to St. James's Park every other Saturday. That's what I do, so I'm going to keep doing it, even though I don't like what the owner's doing. But then there's other fans. I spoke to a couple in the summer, one of whom had a season ticket for more than 50 years, and he decided to give up last March. He actually made the decision before Benitez left because he thought that it was inevitable that Benitez was going to go. And he just said, it doesn't feel like my club anymore. I don't enjoy going. The football's not great, but also I just can't stand sitting inside a stadium which has Sports Direct banners everywhere, and at a club where I feel isn't representing what it always has done before. I spoke to a family actually where the parents had been going with their son, who's now into his 30s, for the last 25 years. The son is still going. He still has made the decision to go to those matches, but the parents are refusing to go because they don't see Newcastle United as being the same club as what it was before. So you have families split, families divided over how and they should support their club.
But from the outside, it doesn't really seem to be totally adding up. After the initial stumble to start the season, Newcastle have actually been mid-table for the last couple months and have done much better. You'd think the atmosphere around the club would be much better as a result of that, but I guess not.
I think part of the reason has been there is such anti-Ashley fervour now. The Benitez's exit was such a climax that some supporters who are really militant in their beliefs aren't going to turn just on short-term upturn in results. And even though things were looking decent in terms of position in the table, still Newcastle were 9th, 10th in the table. They were mid-table. It wasn't like they were mounting a push really for Europe or for the top four. For a club who've had Champions League nights in the last 20 years, who've been in the Europa League in the last 10 years even. But the football that Newcastle have been playing they've had very little possession, average the least possession in the Premier League. The only game they've had more possession was away at Burnley, which they lost. Their strikers aren't scoring goals. Their strikers have got 3 goals between them. Defenders have contributed more than half of their goals. And a lot of the performances didn't match the results. They didn't look like they should have won a lot of those games. And so it always felt unsustainable. It was great. And in some ways you could argue the ends justify the means. But I think that a lot of fans realised that really this wasn't something that was going to last long term. And the reality is that Newcastle have a lower mid-table squad. And that is probably where they're going to finish.
We've talked about their issues getting people into the stadium in the first half of the season. So in early December, they made a decision to do something about it. What did they do?
Well, Newcastle United came up with a bespoke idea to give away 10,000 free half-season tickets, which were available to current season ticket holders to apply for an additional one, be it for a family member or a friend. And their justification from Managing Director Lee Charnley was that they wanted to reward those fans who had stayed loyal and really got behind Steve Bruce and the team this year. Steve Bruce himself had come out after the Southampton game and had basically urged the club to do something about it. They claim it was a scheme that came within those 24 hours and that by the next day that these half-season tickets had been issued. I mean, there's been a lot of scepticism about that. Whatever the cause or however this came about, Newcastle were trying to find a way to fill the ground. I think that at first that they thought that there was a lot of noise on social media or a lot of noise on Tyneside about disquiet and that fans were going to stay away. But I think that there was almost a complacency that they did not believe that fans would do this, because there's been a few pinch points during the Mike Ashley era where fans have threatened to stay away and haven't. But Benitez's exit has proven to be such a volatile situation that actually fans have stayed away, and they haven't just stayed away for 1 or 2 matches. They did it for 9 games in a row. And so really a short-term fix was needed, and that short-term fix was to try and get more fans into the ground by giving away 10,000 half-free season tickets.
So they give away these 10,000 free tickets, right? They're free.
They're free, completely free, yes.
So they give away these 10,000 free tickets. Surely the fan base must be ecstatic.
Well, no. It's again, this has created division, and this is what is again so disheartening about covering Newcastle United at the moment, that there is a fan base which is so divided in so many ways. So there are some fans who, be they of a younger generation or be they fans who maybe couldn't afford to go to St. James's Park this season, who have jumped at the chance, and now family members are able to go. Brother and sister can go together, mother and father. Everyone, all the family can maybe go together now because they've applied for those tickets. So there's a portion of fans who love this idea. But then there are the other side, the boycotters, who believe that they have been completely forgotten about, that this is almost sticking 2 fingers up to them and saying, we will fill the ground, we've forgotten about you. Essentially, in Lee Charnley, the managing director's statement, he basically said within that statement that this was to focus on the season ticket holders were there and not the fans who have left.
Thank you for those supporters that have been in the stadium all season. Thank you to them for backing Steve and the players. And actually, let's get more of them in this stadium. Accepting there'll be some people who, for their own reasons, don't want to come. But this is about those that have made the decision to come, and saying thank you to them.
And so this is a short-term fix to a problem. It has not actually resolved any of the deep-rooted issues. it's basically put a plaster over the situation until the end of the season, try and get the ground as full as possible between now and May. But then nobody knows what happens after that. And in terms of those fans who have been turned away, this is not going to bring them back. And actually, it is probably made them even more entrenched in their position because they feel that their club is not actually taking them into account.
So, in the last 2 games since this new ticket scheme has taken effect against Everton and Leicester City, they've had 52,000 in the stadium in both games. What has been the effect inside the ground when those 52,000 people have come?
For the first game on the match against Everton, I'd say that you could noticeably tell that the atmosphere has improved. Was it the return to the St. James's Park of old, quote unquote, or that we would see in the past? No, certainly not. It was not. It was a different composition of supporters. As I say, those really vocal fans who have taken this position were not back. So the ground was full. You could hear the chatter that you would usually get in between moments of excitement, whereas before it would have been quite quiet. And I think that Everton, the atmosphere, because the referee was seen to be having a negative performance. Jordan Pickford, who came through the Sunderland Academy, was there for Everton, so he acted as a pantomime villain, and also the Everton supporters who were also there. That all added to an increased atmosphere compared to what we've seen before. So it was certainly improved, but was not what it was before. Against Leicester, I think it was different. For a start, it was announced that there was more than 52,000 inside the ground, but just visually looking around, it didn't look like it was quite at that number. I think it was probably close at around 50. And the atmosphere, I think probably with it being New Year's Day, that contributed to a certain degree. It was flat from the start, but the way that the game unfolded, Newcastle had 4 injuries inside 15 minutes, conceded 2 sloppy goals, and were completely outplayed. The atmosphere was flat, and by the end of the match, I would say that it was barely a quarter full, because so many fans had left so early. And that is probably the risk of the football being so bad as it has been, but also if you give free half-season tickets to supporters who haven't paid for something, maybe there isn't quite the determination to stay if things are going badly as if you've actually paid for that ticket yourself.
So this is helping to solve the problem, but it's not exactly fixing it totally.
It's creating a short-term fix for a problem which 10,000 half-free season tickets. If any other club offered that, I think that we would celebrate it, and Newcastle should be applauded to a degree that they are giving so many tickets away to fans who maybe couldn't afford them. But at the same time, this has not solved any of the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is Mike Ashley and his ownership of the club, and he hasn't done anything material to convince supporters that he has changed from the first 12 and a half years of his reign. So there are still so many fans who are disaffected and disillusioned. Some who still go to games are exactly the same, but there are those who are staying away who are not going to be cowed by this. If anything, have become more entrenched because of this, and so Newcastle are going to face another problem situation this summer. Once those free half-season tickets, once that comes to an end, what do they do next?
But should they actually have a little bit of hope? And I say that because in this case, the fans actually did boycott. They took a stand, and it seems like it actually worked to a degree because the club was actually forced to make a concession. And as you mentioned in the summer, this situation is going to come back up again. So should they have hope because they took a stand and actually the club kind of wilted a little bit or conceded a bit to them?
I didn't think that there would be the vast swell of numbers who would actually follow through with it. In the end, they have done. I think the club didn't think that there would be either, and they've been forced to react. So in that sense, it has forced change to a degree. But will that force the complete change in Mike Ashley's ownership himself? Is he suddenly going to start pouring lots of money into the club? Is he suddenly going to change his overarching blueprint of trying to sign players under the age of 24 with sell-on value? I don't think that is likely to be the case. And the only way that Mike Ashley is going to leave is if there is someone who can give him the money he wants, which is roughly 300 to 350 million pounds to buy the club. As of yet, he hasn't had a buyer, or he claims not to have had a buyer. So until that person comes along, Newcastle United and Mike Ashley look, as in his own terms a couple of years ago, to be wedded to each other for the near future.
Do you feel like this could empower or embolden fan bases of other clubs that are not happy with their owner to potentially do a wide-scale boycott because of the concessions that Mike Ashley has given into? I mean, I'm kind of looking at West Ham and clubs like that where they're just clearly upset with their owner.
I think that fans of other clubs may look towards Newcastle and think, actually, if we take a stand here, maybe we can get concessions. Maybe we won't force the owner who we dislike to go, but maybe we can get them to change their ways to a certain degree. Newcastle fans, or at least the more militant ones of them, insist that this is not the end. They will continue as long as Mike Ashley's owner to keep protesting against him. They protest outside his shops. They protest outside the club shops. There's the protest later this month where Tune for Change, which is one of the groups, have issued scarves which are maroon and blue, which they call Era of Ambition scarves, looking back to the mid-90s, and they want fans to turn up at St. James's Park wearing those scarves to show, again, their discontent with the owner. And maybe other fans of other clubs will start to follow suit and think, look, we may be able to make, if we can get a big enough groundswell of support for us in terms of a boycott or protest, whatever it may be, then if you look at Newcastle United, maybe we can get some concessions from our owner.
What do you think this tells us about fan empowerment, boycotting, and owners kind of in general?
I think that what this tells us is that we've reached a stage whereby fans in general, not just at Newcastle but elsewhere, are feeling less and less empowered to be able to do something as they would in the past to force change at their club, in terms of maybe in the past, if there was a local owner of their club, if they sang for the manager to go, or if they showed their discontent to that degree where they still actually were physically in the ground, then they felt that they could force a reaction. Now there's been a change, and because owners appear to be more distant, owners aren't necessarily from the area, they're billionaires or they're conglomerates or they're countries almost who run football clubs, that really it actually needs this sort of material protest or boycott for some fans who are so discontented with their club to be able to affect material change. So rather than just chants or a local newspaper campaign or whatever it may be in the past, they feel the need to use social media as a tool to be able to get supporters to either stay away from games or actively protest, be it by creating these demonstrations outside grounds or inside grounds. We've seen it elsewhere where people may throw tennis balls on at half time or whatever it may be. And so I think that because fans feel pushed further away than ever from being able to impact just in the day-to-day of how their football club is run, that they feel they have to go to more extreme measures to be able to force change at their club if they feel it's necessary.
My name's Alex Hurst. I've been supporting Newcastle United for about 25 years, and I'm the chairperson of the Newcastle United Supporters Trust.
And so how did you approach, boycotting or not boycotting to start the season? Were you in favor of boycotting at first, or, what was kind of your thought process?
Personally, I just have to say before I explain this to you, Josh, I'm not trying to advocate or convince anyone to do what I do or don't do. It's not my role. Personally, I have boycotted games before. I have protested outside ground before. I've walked in late to the game. I've walked in early to the game. I've been there and done it. And Mike Ashley is still here. So I personally decided to get involved with the Supporters Trust and put myself to work that way. And it's a huge task and job for me on top of my actual real job. And I also run and edit the football fanzine and podcast True Faith. So I busy myself a lot in the world of Newcastle United. I decided that ultimately, whilst Newcastle United are in the Premier League, boycotting I don't think it'll get rid of Mike Ashley. Doesn't mean I'm correct in that, and I would certainly never try and convince someone to go to the game if they felt like boycotting was necessary. I just feel that if I'm going to remain engaged, which I want to, and trying to create a better future for the club, which I'm passionate about finding new owners for the club, then staying engaged with the football team, the first team, Newcastle United, was what would work best for me. Because when I walk away, if it gets to a point, and I'm sure a lot of fans aren't a million miles off, where I decide not to go to games anymore, I think that would just be me cutting ties with the thing completely. I wouldn't be on social media talking about the football club. I wouldn't be following the results. I wouldn't be showing an interest in players or manager. I would just completely walk away from it. And that's, every fan is different. So when you say, what are my thoughts on boycott? I think any fan who's boycotting, it's the absolute right thing to do if that's what they think is the correct thing to do. There's, particularly in the age of social media and trying to get across messages in 280 characters, there's all sorts of absolute certainty in the way arguments are presented, when in fact certainty is missing in almost everything to do with football in Newcastle United. The one thing that we do know is that we need a new owner of the football club as soon as possible, but the way to achieve that is up for debate. You've seen the club hand out 10,000 free season tickets, an unprecedented move that is undoubtedly in response to a boycott, so it has had an impact. It would be foolish to suggest otherwise, but Mike Ashley is still the owner, and whilst we're in the Premier League, until someone turns up with the money to buy him, personally, I don't think me not going to the game is going to have any impact on that. I could be wrong, of course, but I also am yet to be convinced by any argument otherwise.
So, Alex, have you stayed in contact with anyone who is boycotting? Are they still active as fans?
So, I do know some people who are boycotting, and yes, they're still very active in trying to remove Mike Ashley from the club, or some are still very active and follow the club's results on social media or follow or watch the games on TV, for example. So some are still active fans, and for example, you have some people who will go to watch the club away from home rather than where they view that money to be going to, whatever club we're playing, rather than giving money to Mike Ashley's Newcastle United. So there is a whole range of people and how they still interact with the club. The people who have tended to found have completely disassociated themselves from the club and don't even talk about it anymore in their personal lives are older fans who have been going for decades type thing. But I find a lot of the people boycotting are still very much engaged and active in the fan community, trying to achieve what they want to achieve in terms of ownership change.
What were your thoughts when they instituted this free 10,000 ticket giveaway?
My thoughts were that it is very sad for a football-mad city in a football-crazy region like the northeast of England that this was necessary. I know a lot of fans don't like the idea. Personally, coming into my workplace in Northumberland, the effect in terms of people who necessarily can't afford to go to football is really positive, because I spoke to members of staff who work for me who were really excited by it because they can't afford up to £800 for a season ticket every year, and this gives them access free of charge for football. But like everything, there is no one easy solution or answer to this one. So, if the question is, was it good that Newcastle United gave free season tickets out? My answer would be yes, but the reasons behind it are very, very bad and very, very indicative of a football club that is disassociated itself from much of its fan base, or part of its fan base at least, through years of neglect, bad decision making, and basically not listening to supporters and the wants and needs of supporters. It's not an impossible job to run Newcastle United quite well and still keep his supporters on side, but Mike Ashley has proved it's impossible for him. So, I like the fact that some people are going to get to go to see football who otherwise couldn't afford to go regularly. I think that's really positive. But the reasons behind the necessity of having to put this, almost unheard of offer in place suggest that the problems that the club have are quite deeply rooted and not going to go away anytime soon.
We said earlier that there were about 5,000 to 6,000 or so less fans at the stadium per match in the first part of the season. What did that feel like at the ground?
The atmosphere was in keeping with the performance on the pitch. I think the atmosphere at St. James Park this season, when the team has played really well, the atmosphere has been good, just like it is for pretty much most other football clubs. If your team's doing okay on the pitch and playing well, the atmosphere will be good. If your team is stinking the players out, the atmosphere will be bad. So, I think the atmosphere, is, like it always has, relates to the performance on the pitch of the team. Undoubtedly, 5,000 to 10,000 less people per home game will have an impact, though.
So do you think that this ticket scheme will have a noticeable difference on the atmosphere and the impact in the stadium in the second half of the season, or do you think it'll just kind of be more or less what it's been like?
Yeah, I think it'll be more or less the same. I don't think the free ticket attendees are going to make a huge difference to the atmosphere. Again, it will, there was a noticeable lack of atmosphere as Newcastle were beaten 3-0 by Leicester. Whether there was 20,000 or 50,000 in the ground, you're still going to get a terrible atmosphere when the team is humiliated by having to play with 10 men for half of the game because of a lack of, injury preparedness from the manager and players gifting goals. It doesn't matter how many people you've got on the ground ready for that. The atmosphere is going to be bad. On the flip side, if the team play well, score goals, great chances, the atmosphere will be good, whether it's 40,000 or 50,000.
So do you think that it's made a difference on fans or the club in general, the boycott?
Well, it's got to make a difference financially, because if you are on average down 7,000 people a game, paying on average £40 a game or whatever it would be in the season tickets, then the club will financially lose out there. Obviously, compared to the the Premier League money from overseas TV and broadcasting rights in the UK, it'll be a drop in the ocean, but it's still money that the club has to replace and find from other sources, so it will have an impact in that respect. In terms of a boycott, if you look, I think the average attendance before the 10,000 free season ticket giveaway, I think the average attendance was about 45,000. So, like I said, that's about 10% of people. That is not going to make Mike Ashley sell the club, because 10% of people are no longer coming. The financial implications of 10% less ticket sales aren't going to force any change, and that's not me trying to belittle the efforts of anyone. That they are just facts, I believe. So I don't think it's made that much of a difference, to be honest with you, in terms of how the club runs itself and sees itself. I think if you were to get crowds to drop below kind of 30, 20,000, that may change things. But ultimately, I don't think that boycotts or not going to a game is going to change the way that Mike Ashley runs the club. I think it's always going to be run the same way while he's the owner, and we just need, as a football club and as a part of the world, we need him to leave the club as soon as possible.
It feels like you've kind of learned a lesson from this, which is boycotts don't really work, and therefore you have to explore other ways of fixing this problem. So what has been your approach kind of aside from boycotts?
Personally, my view is we have emboldened the Newcastle United Supporters Trust, which is a vehicle for ordinary football supporters from around the world. I think every single Premier League team has a supporters trust, not non-for-profit community organisation which exists solely for the benefit of the supporters of Newcastle United. We have nearly 10,000 members now, and if anyone who's listening to this is a Newcastle fan or just a football fan in general, it's £1 to join for 1 year. And we have the eventual goal of buying a share in Newcastle United Football Club. We are about to begin fundraising plans this year in the coming months to do that, so that if the club ever does change hands at this level in the Premier League, we're able to speak to new owners and say, we have this amount of money, will you give us a say in how our football club is run? Because the one thing about football fans is we aren't going to run the football club for the benefit of some rich man somewhere. So I personally think that is the best way to go about it. And we're the same as the people boycotting. We're not going to achieve results in 1 year, maybe, or 2 years. It's going to be a long progress. But going back to the start of our conversation, I've been supporting Newcastle 25 years and hopefully will be for another 25 years at least. So we have time to make a difference. And like anything in life, not just football or sport, if you do want to make a meaningful difference, you're going to have to put a lot of time and effort in.
Do you feel like fans have less power now to do something about ownership than they ever have before? I was talking with Chris Waugh, and that's what he was saying, is that it used to be you could run a local paper campaign, or fans really had a say in what happened at the club. And it feels like that power has waned more and more, to the point that, now at Newcastle, you're resorting to boycotts and trying to buy a stake in the club as the only way to really do something about it.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Chris there. I think that the fact that so much of the club's income is generated from television rights rather than direct ticket sales or merchandise, then it makes it very difficult for fans to try and enforce ownership change, particularly at this level. I think if you go further down the football pyramid in England, it might be a little bit easier, but there is definitely got to be a movement in future to give fans more of a voice in the way that football clubs are run. And that's what we want to see at the Supporters Trust. And hopefully, Josh, if we have this conversation in 10 years' time, you'll be able to point out to other people or other fans or organisations that it is possible to take back control a little bit of how your football club is run as a supporter. Because if football clubs don't exist in the community, the impact is massive on not just obviously the people who support them, but the community in the cities and the towns themselves. That's what will need to happen, that realisation from people with far more power than me or someone who's not going to a game to try and enact.
You can follow all of Chris Waugh's coverage of Newcastle United on The Athletic and the podcast Pod on the Tyne. Alex Hurst is the chairman of the Newcastle Supporters Trust and the editor and host of the Newcastle United fanzine and podcast, True Faith. The show is produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and this was Football Today. And if you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and share it with a friend. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.